This is TWiT.
So, following on the heels of this Chrome news, we have the little whoopsie that Windows Defender thinks Chrome is malware.
Well, it kind of is.
Yeah.
I might not be completely wrong after those three stories.
Yeah, with the subhead of "No good deed goes unpunished," no sooner had Google quickly updated Chrome last week to remove the zero-day flaw in its V8 engine, which, as we know, is being actively exploited in the wild to attack security researchers, then Microsoft's enterprise version of Windows Defender decided that Google's modifications were malicious.
Oh, that's hysterical.
The high end, Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection, ATP, which is the commercial version of the otherwise ubiquitous Defender AV, which we're all using in our Windows machines, and that's Microsoft's premier enterprise security solution. It was having a bad day and labeled Google's browser update a Trojan, a backdoor Trojan. Based on Twitter reports posted by dismayed sysadmins, Defender ATP was detecting multiple files, which are part of last week's Chrome. It was version 88.04324.146. And I noticed I was already at 150, so they've tweaked it again since. They said it was containing a generic backdoor named, it was a PHP backdoor, php/funvalget.a. Though this might have normally been met with somewhat more calm. Of course, in this case, Defender's alerts raised some alarm and quite a bit of stir in enterprise environments due to the recent multiple software supply chain attacks that we've all been made quite aware of recently. So sysadmins were awaiting a formal statement from Microsoft to confirm that the detection was indeed a false positive and nothing to worry about. Fortunately, the built-in, no-charge, free version of Microsoft Defender AV that we all have in our personal Windows 7, 8, and 10 machines was not suspicious of this new release of Chrome, which on one hand is fortunate, or it would have been a far more widespread mess. But it does make one wonder about the detection differential between Microsoft's commercial and the consumer AVs. Why exactly did the enterprise AV freak out, whereas the consumer AVs remained quiet? Does that mean we're getting less protection on the consumer AVs? Anyway, Microsoft did later confirm that this funvalget Trojan, PHP Trojan, for those Chrome files were indeed a false positive due to what Microsoft termed, quote, an automation error, unquote. I guess that's technically true, whatever the heck that means. And I suppose they needed to call it something, because calling it what it really was, a false positive, probably couldn't get past the PR folks at Microsoft. Like, no, you can't call anything a false positive. Come up with some other name. Well, that would be it. But I guess it's kind of an automation error. Oh yeah, that's fine. No one will know what that means. So, I should mention that over the past few years, I have had to exclude my local Windows Defender from poking into many of my own development directories. Unless I do that, shortly after I build a new executable from source, Defender will slide up a red warning from the lower right of the screen saying, not to worry, it's all good. Defender has found and removed the threat that just appeared. Of course, that's my own code, just freshly built from source, so it couldn't be any cleaner. And recently, they've all been, the work that I've been doing has all been DOS executables. And I noted previously that if any malicious Trojan were actually to find itself running in DOS, which it probably couldn't even do these days, it would not be happy. What must be upsetting Defender, because I'm having now to whitelist like all the work that I'm doing, it must be that it's the lack of digital signatures on my freshly built Xes. We've seen through experimental evidence that Defender now places a lot of weight upon the reputation of the certificates which sign today's executables. It's gotten to the point where it's difficult to keep Defender from complaining when any executable is not signed.
That must be a problem for all developers. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, it absolutely must be. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, these things
they're Xes, they're not .coms.
Yeah, they're Xes, and and which is, I'm sure, what Defender looks at and immediately digs into. And so, think about how we know how many bazillion different malicious things they're looking for. And so it's just going to be the case that somewhere in an Xe, there's going to be a collision of some little fingerprint that matches enough to upset Defender. And then it looks and sees, oh, and look, there's no signature. Well, this, when in doubt, protect the user. And of course, today we know that Windows itself, the OS, refuses to load any unsigned device drivers into its kernel. Device driver signing is no longer optional. Developers can force the issue by disabling Windows driver signing enforcement, as it's called. But I'll bet that the way things are going, we're not far from the day when Windows will be elevating that requirement to the desktop. And now, boy, that'll cause a big
Apple
uproar.
Does that already. Apple's already doing that.
Yeah, and I don't think we're far away from that in Windows. Yeah. There might be something like a UAE dialog that users are forced to push past whenever they wish to run any unsigned executable. And that would, of course, from a social engineering standpoint, that would tend to cause developers to start signing their Xes. So the problem is certificates are not free. There is no there's no let's sign equivalent of let's encrypt.
Apple has two layers. They have signing and notarizing, and they will not open an app that's not notarized unless you have to know how to jump through hoops. It's not even a UAE or UAC escalation. You have to actually jump through hoops to get the thing opened. Their gatekeeper is very aggressive.
Oh, yeah, UAE. I mean, UAC.
UAC. I don't know. Did you say UAE? I said UAE.
I have UAE in my show
okay.
UAC.
All right. We both got it wrong. I don't want to derail you, but it must be, how do you develop a program like SpinRite, which is a DOS program? The normal cycle for development is you write, compile, and run, write, compile, run. But for you can't. You're writing and compiling on Windows, right? You're not or are you working in DOS?
No, I am. I'm testing under DOS, but I am writing and assembling. And it turns out it was surprisingly difficult to do this.
I bet, because
I have some tools which have been abandoned, and they're 16-bit tools.
Yeah.
I found this thing called VDOS. There's like DOSBox, and there's, and of course there's VirtualBox, and there's a bunch of things, but there's one funky thing called VBox Xe. And
so it lets you run DOS in a virtual machine.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And it's funny because when you launch it, it will read a config sys and an autoexec bat from your current directory.
Oh.
So what I did was
you automatically launched SpinRite.
Well, no. I'm just building. So I have to do my linking. I use a 16-bit linker in order to link 16-bit DOS code.
Wow.
And then I use a program to process my symbol files for the DOS debugger, which is only 16-bit code.
Right.
It was called Periscope, and
I remember
it was
Periscope,
written by a guy named Brett Salter, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. I reached out to Brett to say, hey, believe it or not, Brett, I'm still using Periscope, and it turns out he's not still breathing oxygen.
I remember his name. Wow.
Yep. And then I also contacted Bob Smith, who was the author of 386 to the Max. That was my favorite memory manager.
Yes, you're using that
from back then. Yep, and Bob is still around.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So that makes sense. So at least you can do it all on the same machine.
Yes. So I'm doing it all on the same machine. And then the problem I recently had was that in order to be in DOS, I want to debug with symbols. So the DOS box needs access. I mean, I want to debug with source. Right. So the DOS box needs access to the source code
and the symbol tables. So
for a while, I was loading the whole Windows for Workgroups 3.1 IP stack in DOS and running a Windows for Workgroup client.
Wow.
And then I would use share to map the development directory into the C drive under DOS so that the code running there could see the source code on my Windows machine from in DOS.
Wow.
Well, that all worked. That's how I developed read speed. That all worked until I started working on SpinRite 6.1, because SpinRite itself is way bigger. Read speed was 19K.
Right.
And so that was no problem. SpinRite is a couple hundred K. And so the problem was the full DOS network stack took up way too much memory, along with the debugger and its symbol table, which was itself 160K.
Uh-huh.
So there wasn't enough room. Fortunately, one of the guys in the GRC SpinRite dev group had done some work and played around with using a packet driver. And instead of using the whole DOS, the TCP/IP stack, and then Windows for Workgroups 3.1, there are packet drivers for all these old network adapters. And the packet driver is super tiny, but all it is just packets. So it turns out someone created, there's an FTP server, an FTP client, but also the equivalent of wget. There's an HTTP GET command, which is transient. So now my build process under Windows, whenever I do a build, and it's just an Alt-A, and assembling, it's like instantaneous.
Sure.
So I just use it for syntax checking.
Yeah, all the time.
I'm building constantly.
Yeah.
Every time I do that, it zips all of my assembly code and the header files into a sr.zip. And then when I switch over and run the debugger, the act of starting the debugger launches the HTTP GET in order to pull using the packet driver. Now I've got 400K of RAM because I got rid of all of the IP stack and Windows for Workgroups. So it pulls the zip over, uses PK unzip.
Oh, yeah.
Phil Katz's old unzip in order to unzip the files into an SM directory in DOS. And then the debugger says, oh, look, here's all the source code. So it is, believe me, Leo, when I finally say goodbye to DOS and the BIOS and I switch to SpinRite 7, where I'll be operating under, a 32-bit mode. I mean, it's barely possible to still develop this way. I mean, I'm having to get very creative.
I'm impressed as hell. That's amazing.
In order to do that.
That's amazing. Wow.
But it does work. Yeah.
See what he does for us, folks. Nice job, Steve. Thank you.